Sometimes the people you thought would cheer for you get the most upset when you finally start doing better. It's not because you did anything wrong, it's because you proved you didn't need them to move forward. People feel left behind when you outgrow them, and it is one of the hardest realities to accept because you think growth is supposed to inspire people, but often it threatens them instead. And when you change your habits, when you shift your mindset, when you decide to stop doing what no longer serves you and you start pursuing something better, the people around you who are still standing in the same place begin to feel the distance you created without even saying a word. They feel it in the silence. They feel it in your decisions. They feel it when you are no longer available for the same conversations or the same distractions, and that creates a sense of loss for them even if you didn't intend it, because your movement forward forces them to look at themselves and realize they stayed still while you kept walking. And instead of admitting that truth, instead of owning the fact that they never took the same steps, it's easier for them to direct that frustration toward you, and suddenly they're angry because you left them behind. Even though you didn't push them back, you just refused to stay stuck. When people feel left behind, they often rewrite the story to protect their ego. They'll say, you changed, you abandoned them, you forgot where you came from. But what they don't say is that they had the exact same opportunity to change too. They had the same time, the same days, the same chances to grow, but they chose comfort while you chose growth. And that's the real difference. You didn't betray them. You simply stopped betraying yourself. And it's easier for them to blame you than face the mirror and realize they never moved. And that blame turns into resentment. It turns into passive comments. It turns into judgment disguised as advice. But all of that is really an attempt to pull you back to the place they feel safe, because if you keep going forward, they're forced to watch the gap between you grow wider, and that scares them. Growth is uncomfortable for the one who grows, but it's also uncomfortable for the ones who stay the same because they measure themselves against you without even realizing it. They see you building new habits. They see you carrying yourself differently. They see you setting boundaries, and whether they admit it or not, it makes them question why they haven't done the same. And sometimes people would rather attack your progress than confront their own stagnation, because confrontation with self requires honesty, and honesty is heavy. So they choose anger instead. They choose distance. They choose criticism. But none of that is really about you. It's about the way your movement makes them feel about themselves. People who feel left behind also try to hold on tighter. They'll remind you of the old you. They'll try to pull you back into old patterns. They'll guilt you with memories. They'll test your boundaries to see if you'll bend. And all of that is rooted in fear that they're losing the version of you they were comfortable with, fear that the bond you shared can't survive this new version of you, fear that if you keep climbing, they won't be able to reach you anymore. And the truth is, maybe they won't. Maybe the relationship can't survive the gap, but that doesn't mean your growth is wrong. It means you're stepping into what's next while they're still holding on to what was. Outgrowing people doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, it's subtle, it's just you no longer laughing at the same jokes, no longer interested in the same gossip, no longer willing to waste energy on the same cycles. And to them, it feels like rejection, it feels like betrayal. But it's really just alignment. Your values shifted, your vision expanded, your priorities changed. And not everyone can make that transition with you. And that's okay. But the part that stings them the most is that you didn't wait, you didn't ask permission, you didn't stop to pull them forward, you just moved. And that movement is a reminder that they could have done the same but didn't. What really lies beneath the anger of those who feel left behind is grief. Grief for the version of you they knew, grief for the comfort of sameness, grief for the idea that life could stay predictable, and grief has a way of showing up as bitterness when it isn't understood. So when you see that anger, when you hear those comments, when you notice the distance, don't take it personally because it's not really about you. It's about what your growth reflects back to them. And though it's painful to watch people you cared about react with anger instead of support, You have to remember that outgrowing people is a natural part of becoming who you were meant to be. And the anger you face is just proof that you've taken a step they were too afraid to take themselves. Their anger is often rooted in their own insecurity, not your success. And this is something most people miss when they first experience backlash for making progress, because it feels like you did something wrong. It feels like you hurt someone. But in reality, what you did was hold up a mirror they didn't want to look into. And mirrors can be painful. When someone sees you improving, getting healthier, making wiser choices, setting stronger boundaries, or simply choosing peace, it can trigger feelings inside them that say, why not me? Why haven't I done that? Why am I still stuck where I am? And instead of facing those questions with honesty, they find it easier to project anger outward at you, because projection is less painful than self-reflection. So their insecurity wears the mask of criticism, bitterness, or hostility. But underneath that mask is really a fear that they are being left behind or exposed. When you recognize that insecurity is the true source, it becomes easier not to take their words personally, because you understand that their reaction says more about them than it ever says about you. And that shift in perspective is powerful. Think about how many times people will accuse you of being selfish just because you finally stopped being available for their every need. Or they'll say, you think you're better than us, when really all you did was choose a different path. Or they'll roll their eyes at your new discipline, your new goals, your new habits, not because those things are bad, but because they highlight what they haven't done. And in that moment, their anger is nothing more than insecurity being exposed. And that exposure feels threatening, so they lash out. Insecurity is sneaky. It doesn't always show up as open attacks. Sometimes it shows up in subtle digs, in sarcasm, in backhanded compliments, in small reminders of your past to try to drag you back to who you were. Because if they can keep you connected to the old version of yourself, then they don't have to face the discomfort of seeing you grow into someone new. And the irony is, they may not even realize they're doing it. They think they're protecting the relationship. They think they're keeping you grounded, but in reality, they're just protecting themselves from confronting the gap between where they are and where you've gone. And that gap is what fuels the insecurity. One of the clearest signs that anger is rooted in insecurity is when people make your progress about them. They twist your wins into their losses, as if your success somehow equals their failure. But growth is not a competition, and yet to someone insecure, it feels like it, because deep down they fear there isn't enough room for both of you to win. So when you climb higher, they don't see it as inspiration. They see it as proof that they're being left behind. And insecurity tells them the only way to feel better is to bring you down. So their anger is their attempt to level the field, not by rising themselves, but by pulling you back down. Another way insecurity disguises itself as anger is through control. People who feel insecure about your growth will try to control your narrative. They'll remind you of your flaws. They'll downplay your achievements. They'll act like your choices are mistakes, not because they truly believe it, but because controlling the story gives them a sense of safety. If they can convince themselves and others that your progress isn't real or isn't meaningful, then they don't have to feel the weight of their own lack of movement. And in that way, their anger is a shield, a way to avoid the discomfort of change. What's important to realize is that insecurity-based anger has nothing to do with you personally, even though it's directed at you. It's rooted in their internal battle, their private doubts, their quiet fears that they're not enough, and your decision to move forward pressed against those wounds. You didn't cause the wounds, but you revealed them, and revealing pain almost always triggers resistance. So when people get angry as you move on, you can almost guarantee that underneath the surface is insecurity, whispering that they should be doing more, that they could be more. And instead of listening to that whisper, they fight you because it's easier to fight someone else than to confront yourself. Moving on exposes who was really supportive and who was secretly holding you back. Because when you decide to take steps toward growth, healing, or simply creating a new chapter for yourself. The people in your life reveal their true intentions through their reactions, and what you thought was unconditional support sometimes turns out to be conditional. Conditional on you staying the same, conditional on you being predictable, conditional on you not outgrowing the role they were comfortable with you playing. And once you move differently, once you raise your standards or shift your energy, it forces the people around you to show their real colors without you even asking, because genuine support will celebrate you even if it means they have to adjust, while hidden opposition will disguise itself as disappointment, criticism, or even silence. And it is in that silence that you start to notice who was clapping for you only when it was convenient. Moving on is like a filter that separates people. The ones who love you for who you are will stay, but the ones who benefited from who you used to be will start to fall away, and it becomes clear that not everyone wanted the best for you. Some just wanted what was best for them. And when you no longer fit that mold, their true feelings are exposed. You start to notice who suddenly withdraws their energy, who stops checking in, who distances themselves once you begin making progress, because your progress makes them feel unseen. Your growth makes them uncomfortable. And instead of admitting that, they act like you've done something wrong. But in reality, all you did was take steps forward. The power of moving on is that it strips away the masks people wear, because while you were stuck, while you were repeating cycles, they were comfortable. They could play the role of advisor, caretaker, or even superior. But once you break free from that cycle, their influence begins to fade, and it becomes clear that their support wasn't for your growth. It was for their control, and it is in those moments that you realize some people didn't want to see you win. They just wanted to see you need them. And when you stop needing them, the truth is exposed in the form of frustration or even bitterness. Sometimes moving on doesn't just expose individuals, it exposes the dynamic of entire relationships. Because when you grow, the balance shifts. What once worked no longer fits. And suddenly you see that some connections were built not on mutual respect, but on your willingness to stay small. And once you refuse to shrink, those connections either adjust or they break. And that breaking is painful, but it is also clarifying, because it leaves behind only the people who are strong enough to handle your growth without being threatened by it. Another way moving on exposes people is through how they handle your boundaries. True supporters respect when you say no, they respect when you protect your time, but those who secretly held you back will fight it. They'll guilt you, they'll shame you, they'll try to convince you that your boundaries are selfish, and that reaction tells you everything you need to know, because anyone who can't celebrate your growth or respect your limits was never truly supporting you. They were supporting the version of you that made life easier for them. What becomes clear in all of this is that moving on is not just about leaving situations behind. It's about revealing the truth about the people in those situations. It's about seeing who genuinely wants you to thrive and who only wanted you around as long as it didn't cost them anything. And that exposure, though uncomfortable, is necessary, because without it, you might have kept believing that everyone around you was for you, when in reality, some were quietly rooting against you, and the only way to know for sure is to take that step forward and watch who claps and who crosses their arms. Independence threatens those who benefited from your dependence, because when you start relying on yourself, when you stop leaning on people in the ways they became comfortable with, it changes the entire dynamic of the relationship. And for some people, that shift feels like a loss of control. They thrived when you needed their advice, their approval, their resources, their presence to feel complete. But once you realize you can stand on your own 2 feet, once you find strength in your own choices, their position in your life no longer carries the same weight, and that threatens the very foundation they built their connection with you on. Because if they were only strong when you were weak, what happens when you are no longer weak? If their importance was defined by your dependence, then your independence makes them question their own value. Dependence creates comfort for others because it ensures you are predictable. They know you will come to them for help. They know you will seek their validation before making a move. They know you will keep them at the center of your decisions, and that keeps them feeling significant. But independence breaks that pattern. It tells them you are no longer waiting for permission. You are no longer seeking constant reassurance. You are no longer afraid to make choices that serve your growth, even if they don't understand. And for someone who benefited from being your anchor, that feels like abandonment, not because you rejected them, but because you stopped revolving your world around them. And that loss of influence turns into anger disguised as concern, into frustration masked as advice, into disappointment expressed as judgment. But underneath all of it is fear, fear that without your dependence, they no longer matter as much as they used to. What often happens is that people who once seemed supportive start questioning you the moment you stop needing them. They'll ask if you're sure about your decisions. They'll highlight the risks. They'll remind you of past mistakes, not because they genuinely want to protect you, but because every step you take without them chips away at the role they built in your life, and independence forces them to confront their own insecurities. Because if you can do it alone, then maybe they aren't as indispensable as they thought, and that realization stings deeply. So instead of adjusting, instead of finding new ways to support you, they resist, they argue, they criticize, because it's easier to challenge your independence than to face the discomfort of redefining their role. Independence also reveals how much of the relationship was built on imbalance, because true connections are not threatened by your growth. True relationships celebrate when you become stronger, but the ones who benefited from your dependence see your progress as competition. They measure their worth by how much you need them. So when that need fades, they feel replaced, overlooked, diminished, and rather than seeing your strength as freedom, they see it as rejection. But what they don't realize is that independence doesn't mean you don't value them. It means you finally value yourself. It means you can still appreciate their presence without being controlled by it. It means you can choose to keep people in your life out of love and respect, not necessity or fear. The greatest threat independence poses to those who benefited from your dependence is that it removes their leverage. They can no longer use guilt to keep you in place. They can no longer manipulate your decisions by reminding you how much you need them. They can no longer hold their support over your head as a condition for loyalty, because independence frees you from the subtle chains of control. It gives you the power to say no without apology, to move forward without explanation, to live without asking for approval. And once you taste that freedom, you realize how many relationships were built not on love, but on dependency. And that realization changes everything, because you see clearly who was really with you and who was just benefiting from your need to lean on them. Their reaction is proof that your growth is real, because people don't get angry over things that don't matter. They don't push back against changes that don't carry weight. And when someone reacts with frustration, jealousy, or criticism the moment you move differently, it's a sign that what you're doing is significant, it's visible, it's undeniable, and sometimes the most accurate validation that you're on the right track is not applause, but resistance, because resistance shows you've shifted the balance, you've disrupted the comfort zone that others built around your old self, and that disruption proves that you are no longer the person you used to be. Growth always makes people notice, even if they pretend not to, because growth changes the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you decide, the way you no longer tolerate what you once accepted, and those changes can't be ignored. When people react negatively to your evolution, what they're really showing is that your growth has weight, it has power, and it unsettles the dynamics they relied on. If you were still stuck, if you were still repeating old patterns, no one would feel threatened. No one would feel the need to question you. But the fact that they suddenly have so much to say, so many opinions about your choices, so many judgments about your direction, proves that your shift is obvious and real, because no one fights against something that doesn't exist. And in this way, their anger, their silence, or their distance becomes unintentional confirmation that your growth is tangible. You can see it in their eyes. You can hear it in their tone. You can feel it in the way they start to treat you differently. And while it might sting, it is also evidence that the work you're doing is creating undeniable change. Growth is often invisible to the person experiencing it because it feels like daily discipline, small sacrifices, quiet decisions that no one sees, and you can start to doubt yourself, wondering if the effort is even working, if you're really changing at all, but then someone reacts. Someone who knew the old version of you looks uncomfortable, lashes out, or distances themselves, and suddenly you realize that all those small internal changes have built into something big enough for others to notice. Their reaction becomes the mirror that shows you what you've been building all along. It reflects back to you that you are different now, and sometimes that reflection is more honest than the one you give yourself. Because while you're focused on how far you still have to go, they're reacting to how far you've already come. The proof of growth isn't just in achievements or milestones. It's in the way your presence shifts the energy around you. And if someone reacts with negativity to that shift, it's not because you failed, it's because you succeeded. You broke the unspoken agreement to stay the same. You broke the pattern that kept others comfortable, and your very existence in a new space reminds them that change is possible, and that reminder makes them uncomfortable because it forces them to see where they've resisted growth themselves. So their reaction is never just about you, it's about the way your growth exposes their stagnation, and that exposure hurts. What makes their reaction such clear proof is that people only resist what they can't control, and once you move beyond their influence, they recognize that they can no longer keep you in the same place. And that realization sparks the frustration you see, because growth puts you beyond the reach of old expectations, old manipulations, old cycles, and those who thrived on those cycles feel powerless without them. So they react in anger. But their anger is only evidence that you've stepped into a space they can't follow unless they choose to grow too. And most people would rather complain about your progress than face their own lack of it, which is why their reaction is one of the clearest confirmations that you're not just talking about change, you're living it.